In episode 155 of the 40 Plus Fitness podcast, we meet Dr. Mark Williams and discuss his book, The Art and Science of Aging Well, a physician's guide to a healthy body, mind, and spirit. You can find the show notes for this episode at 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/155. Have you decided you're ready to make a change? To reclaim your health and fitness? The 40 Plus Fitness podcast is here for you. I'm your host, Alan Meisner. I'm an NSAM certified personal trainer with a specialization in corrective exercise and fitness nutrition. Let me be your coach as you find your way on your health and fitness journey. All right, let's go. Dr. Mark Williams is a clinical professor of medicine at the University of North Carolina with an active clinical practice in Wilmington, North Carolina. So Mark, welcome to 40 Plus Fitness.
Thanks so much, Alan. It's really great to be on your podcast.
Thank you. I really appreciated this book. You know, I've done a few other books on aging here on the podcast. You know, Josh Middledorf's book is excellent, and this is excellent. And I really like the history. You not only got into the evolution of, you know, evolutionary theories and things like that of this, but you really kind of got into the meat of the history of aging and how, for lack of a better word, things, sometimes the older generation is treated better and sometimes we're treated worse. And it's, you know, right now we're about to face an era where in the US anyway, the population that's effectively older is going to be quite a dominant force. So I think there's a lot of interesting things that are going to go on, particularly with science around that group, because it's such a large group of individuals for the medical community to service. So I'm kind of excited about that, you know, that baby boomer group going in there before me. I'm an Xer right at the beginning of Xing, but, you know, so I'm kind of looking forward to what the boomers are able to pull together for us as they become so dominant.
This is a really unprecedented time in history because a baby girl born today can expect to live, has a 50-50 chance of living to the age of 80. And to put that into historical perspective, during the days of the Roman Empire, over 2,100 years ago, the average life expectancy at birth was 35. And at the end of the last century, 1900, the average life expectancy at birth was 47. So it took mankind 19 centuries to increase the lifespan by 12 years from 35 to 47. Just over the last 100 years, the lifespan is now approaching 80, so that everyone listening to this podcast has a 50-50 chance of living to the age of 80.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think, you know, you mentioned in the book, and I really kind of like this sentiment, that it's not how long you live that you should really be looking for. I know that there's another podcaster I listen to says he wants to live to 180, but it's not how long you live, but it's kind of the quality of that life and being able to maintain your independence. And I really kind of like that sentiment of this because I think so many people are saying, well, I want to live till I'm 100. But the reality is if you're not healthy for the last 20 years or 30 years of that 100, it's not going to be the most pleasant life.
Well, that's true. And there's also a statistic that's very important for people to remember, and that's the death rate. The death rate is 1 per person. And what that means is that the nature of our journey is more important than the length of it, because we have the other message from science is that we have a tremendous amount of control over the quality of our old age. And that's where I really am excited that health and fitness comes right into that choice that we have about ourselves.
Absolutely. So as you kind of get into the book and we really kind of start getting into the meat of it, you start out at the beginning saying, okay, let's go ahead and get rid of some myths. And so in the book, you identify 8 myths of aging.
That's right.
Do you mind going through those?
Sure. The first myth basically is that all old people are the same and they're falling apart. And it's clear that each of us age differently. Anyone who's gone to a reunion over a period of time realizes that there's some people who haven't aged much over that time interval and other people who seem to have aged a considerable amount. So it's not that we're all the same at all. Each organ system within our bodies age at a different rate. Moreover, we're not really falling apart. And I'd be the first to say that the marathon runner at the age of 80 can't run as fast as he could when he was 25. But when we really think about the changes in our body, the growth of our intellect, and the deepening of our emotions, my basic argument is that as we get older, we become more and not less. The second myth that I think is a very important one is that losing weight will make you live longer. And our society is very weight conscious and weight oriented, but in some ways, severe dieting can be hazardous to your health. So when we look at the basic curves of our body mass index, which is basically a measure of how hefty we are, there's a broad range in the very center of that says as long as you're not very skinny or morbidly obese, you'll do just fine. And that's what the science tells us. The third myth is that as we age, we become more forgetful and senile. And nothing could be further from the truth. It is true that our memories change as we age. It's true that certain diseases like Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, strokes occur disproportionately as we get older. But those are disease processes. That's not normal aging. And one of the things that I really think is important is when I see individuals in my active clinic, there are three basic symptoms that I really pay attention to. One, if someone says, I forget where I put my car keys. The second symptom, I walk into a room and say, now, what did I come in here to get? Or opening a refrigerator door and say, oh my goodness, what was I trying to get here? And the third devastating symptom, forgetting someone's name at a social event. These are all symptoms of being totally normal. They're not the warning symptoms of Alzheimer's disease.
Well, that's good to know because I've done all of those.
Yes, I think we all have. And the challenge is that in contemporary America, you can't afford to make a mistake the older you get. So it makes it tricky if we start doubting ourselves when we forget where we put our keys or while we came into a room. The fourth myth has to do with teaching an old dog new tricks. We tend to think that the older we get, the less we're able to learn things and to be creative and productive, and there's absolutely no evidence of that, and a lot of counter evidence that through the works of great masters, Aristotle, Leonardo da Vinci, Georgia O'Keeffe, that as people get older, we become more rich and complex in the way we do things and solve problems. The fifth myth is there's nothing we can do about aging, and it's inevitable, and why should I even bother? It's predetermined. And it's really clear that that's not the case at all, that we have a lot of choice, that if we look at studies of twins, only about 30% of our longevity is governed by our genes, which means that 70% is within our control. So the way I kind of think about aging from a genetic standpoint is like a ski lift. Our genes get us to the top of the mountain. So our genetic structure and predisposition gets us into our early and middle 20s. And then we can decide what kind of ride we want to take down the mountain. Do we want it to be fast and exciting and short? Or do we want it to be more leisurely and complicated and eventful? The sixth myth is that older people are an economic burden. And again, that's just clearly not the case at all. There are all of these magazine covers that show a barbell with one or two older people on one side and a young person trying to hold up the economic burden of a growing and aging society. But if we really think about this, Florida is one of the oldest and most rapidly aging states in the Union, and they're not going bankrupt because of the age. And Japan is one of the oldest nations on the planet, and they're not going bankrupt because their population is getting older. So it's a myth that older people are an economic burden. To be sure, older people need more health care, they have more needs, but they also provide a lot of uncompensated care in the sense of volunteering and supporting a number of community and family and religious associations. The seventh myth, old people are not interested in sex or sexual activity. There is a wealth of information that show that older couples remain sexually active, that they say that they're happier with their sex lives than they were in their 40s. And so it's more of an attitude than it is of something that's wired into our biologic systems. And finally, there's a big myth that as you get older, you're going to end up in a nursing home. And the fact is that only about 3.5% of people live in nursing homes, and that most people can choose the type and structure of the living environments that they're in, except at the very, very end of life. So 8 different myths, all of them, by and large, half-truths with a lot of nonsense mixed in.
Yeah, and I appreciate you kind of getting those out there at the beginning, because it really did set the stage for the rest of this. And, as you kind of, like I said, you got into the history and some of the evolution of all of this. Then you actually started getting into the science of it, the body. And that's, again, just kind of an area where I really like to geek out and get into that stuff. And so I've done a lot of reading on cell structure and how cells age and, the duplication and telomeres and all of that. But I really haven't covered it on the podcast. Do you mind kind of giving us a 101 version of cell aging?
Sure. It used to be thought that cells were immortal and that one cell would continue to multiply and divide indefinitely. And in fact, a Nobel laureate named Alexis Carrel made the point that cells were in fact immortal. But that view, which was held for quite a long time, was disproven by a great scientist named Leonard Hayflick, who showed after very careful experiments that cells stop reproducing. What they would do to get the cell aging is they'd put cells in a petri dish, they would fill the entire petri dish, and then when they got ready to reproduce again, they'd put them in a fresh dish. And you couldn't do this but roughly 50 times or so before the cell cultures died. And Hayflick tried to figure out what in the world is going on here. If cells are immortal, they should just be able to go forever. And to boil down some very interesting cell biology, it turns out that you can defeat cellular aging and this finite limit of cell divisions. But there's one problem when you do that. The cells become malignant. So malignancy is really human cells that have overthrown the aging control. And in looking at this more carefully, scientists realize that cells don't time the number of cell divisions, they count the number of cell divisions. And that counting is wired into our DNA, so that when our DNA, the double helix, begins to unravel and a new strand of DNA is formed, the two ends of the DNA don't quite line up. And that is kind of like a man's necktie. One end is a little longer than the other, and the end of the DNA is snipped off so that the ends are roughly the same size. And there's a little period there, like a period at the end of a sentence that tells the cell that's what's going on. And so at the tips of each strand of DNA, there's a telomere that's kind of like the hard part at the end of a shoelace. And that telomere is like a sentence with 50 periods written at the end of the sentence, so that every time the cell reproduces, it cuts off a period. So it keeps doing that each time. And so it knows when it gets to the end of the sentence, if there's no period, then it's run out of time, and that it's better for that cell than to undergo cell death or apoptosis. So that's kind of what happens. So in order to deal with that cellular aging, we've learned about what affects telomeres, such as stress, for example. If someone's under a lot of stress, they end up losing telomeres faster. And malignancies have an enzyme that actually sticks an extra period at the end of each sentence, so the cell never gets the signal to turn itself off. So it's a very interesting part of the way our biology is wired that's a fundamental part of our genetic structure.
Yeah. And so, the telomere is going to get shorter and shorter and shorter until effectively there's no more of it to cut off. And then basically the DNA strand can't do what it needs to do, and the cell dies. Yeah. So the next thing I kind of wanted to get into, because it was near and dear to my heart, because this month we're doing a sugar challenge, to kind of get your sugar intake down. And so the advanced glycation end products is kind of an aging process within the body, or at least a decline process within the body. Do you mind taking some time to talk about that and what that does to us?
Sure. Basically, in terms of fundamental chemistry, chemical reactions can occur either in the presence of an enzyme that speeds up the chemical reaction, or it can occur just when two substances are put together. And it turns out that these aging products called advanced glycation end products really are the category where two chemicals get together. And one of those chemicals in the body is sugar or glucose. So if our glucose levels are high, then that glucose binds with various proteins such as hemoglobin. And for people with diabetes, doctors use a measure called the hemoglobin A1C, which really is a measure of the amount of glycated hemoglobin, or the amount of hemoglobin that has this sugar bound to it. The net effect of these glycation end products is that they gum up the works. So we end up with a lot of cross-linking of proteins, and you can just think about it as gumming up a lot of the cellular machinery. The thing that's interesting is that not only does our body naturally make these things, but that our diet really has a fairly significant impact as well. So there are a number of foods such as the donuts, soy sauce, the caramel-colored soft drinks, and various other food additives. The process is what makes meat turn brown when you cook it. And so eating a lot of grilled meat also adds to these products. So with the acronym of AGE, these things really do age our system. And one of the things we can do is try to eat more of foods without these food additives, and also to really cut back on our simple sugars.
Yeah, because when you're eating those high glycemic foods, they're basically causing this issue. And that's why, and I think you said in the book that, the average blood cell lives for about 3 months. So that's why they like to look at the A1C, because that kind of gives them a feel for what your sugar tolerance, how much sugar you've been eating, and how your body's handling it over the course of the last 3 months. So I do think that's a very good blood test for people to at least have some understanding of how you're aging yourself today. And then getting that A1C number down over time is obviously going to slow down or stop this process from happening as much.
That's for sure. And it links into exercise, because that's one of the cornerstones of the way we get our body to use that sugar and to help lower your hemoglobin A1C.
And that's a great segue into the next topic I want to get to. Being a personal trainer, I always want to talk about training. You have several aging secrets in the book that are really, top notch. And that's, get the book. It's called The Art and Science of Aging Well. And you have some aging secrets in there. And I don't want to give it all away, but I have to stop on secret number 2, which is challenge your body. And could you just take some time to talk about the benefits of exercise as it relates to aging?
Absolutely. It's clear, Alan, that our bodies were made to move. So it's really important for us to be as physically active as we possibly can. Some of the proven benefits are a reduced risk of heart disease, reduced risk of sudden death, lowered blood pressure, improved mood, less depression and anxiety, weight loss, loss of fat, improved control of diabetes mellitus, and probably a reduced risk of some malignancies as well. So it's clear that exercise is critically important. The question that always comes up to me as a physician is what and how much exercise is enough? And I'd like to share a bit of wisdom that was given to me by an elderly farmer who was brought in by his daughter because he hadn't seen a doctor. He was in his late 80s and hadn't seen a physician in over 30 years. And she figured it was about time for the old fella to get a checkup. And I went over him, and he was in actually very good shape. And I said, do you have a secret for how you maintain your longevity? And he said, well, I don't really have a secret, but I'll tell you one fact. I worked up a good sweat every day. And I think when we're thinking about exercise, if we can stay physically active every day, then that's a real secret of aging.
Absolutely. Yes. So yes, get out there. It doesn't have to be in a gym, but just getting out there and working up some form of sweat each day is going to benefit you in so many different ways, including the anti-aging effect. So, and as we kind of talk about that, because I think everybody knows, at least it's kind of the premise is that, but you said kind of myth number one, maybe we're not falling apart, but there is kind of a natural decline rate.
Yes.
But there's some good news. And so you said when you start really looking at the science around the decline rate, there's kind of three inferences that you can make. Could you kind of go through those inferences? Because I think that's a really good message to close with.
Well, one of the challenges is that we tend to focus on all the declines psychologically. So we say, woe is me, I can't run as fast at 65 as I could when I was 16. And that's true. But when we really look at our physical function over time, the first inference is that the amount that we lose is surprisingly small due to aging itself compared to the amount that's within our control. For example, the world record time for marathon runners, I think for the overall world record is around 2 hours and 4 minutes or so. The world record time for somebody around 80 years old is only 3 hours and 15 minutes. So it's not that much more for somebody in their 80s even finishing a marathon, let alone doing it in under 3.5 hours. So the point is that, yes, we lose physical capability when we age, but it's a minority of what's in our control. The second inference is that the older we get, the more important self-maintenance activities become. When we're young, if we have a bad case of the flu, when we're in bed for a day or two, we pop out, we feel a little wobbly, and then we get back on the track, and in no time we're up to full speed. When we're older, we really have to work to get back to the level of function so that we can become deconditioned very quickly. So self-maintenance activities are very important. When you're young, you can afford to be a couch potato. You really can't afford it, but you can get away with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer to that is, you are causing a faster decline, but you're at, like you said, you're right now at the top of the mountain, so the relative distance is not that fast, but you're traveling faster towards the bottom of that hill. And so if you kind of take off, if you don't pay attention at that point, you just have so much more opportunity to lose a lot really quickly.
That's for sure, and you don't even realize it. The third inference is that if most people are not Olympic caliber athletes, and if most people are not totally sedentary, but they function somewhere in between, then the fact of the matter is that the older we get, the greater the opportunity for improvement. And Alan, that's not pie in the sky. There's some very elegant studies that show people in their 80s and 90s have considerable benefits for training in terms of resistance training and endurance training to reduce their risk of falls, to improve their mental function. It all fits together. So again, I think it's very important for us to think about the 5 different secrets of aging, the cornerstone being to challenge your body.
Absolutely. And, onto that last point, when I'm working with someone, when they're first coming in the gym and they have really no experience whatsoever, we can see strength improvements of, 10% week on week when they first get there, because at first they have really no training, and then they start kind of getting their mind and muscles working together, and they start seeing these increases in strength. So at the very beginning, most people are going to see significant improvements in a relative perspective. And again, if they keep at it, that will kind of plateau a little bit, but there's always that opportunity. As long as someone's taking a breath, I believe they have an opportunity to be a better person and improve their health. And so I really like leaving with that really positive message that there is something we can do to stave off aging and live a better life, not necessarily longer life, but a better life as a result.
Absolutely.
Again, I can't thank you enough for the opportunity to read this book. It was really, really good. If someone wanted to get in touch with you or get the book, where would you like for me to send them?
I think the simple way is on Facebook, there's Mark Williams, MD, as a place to look. If you want to get the book, it's on Amazon.com. You can get it from the University of North Carolina Press, or you can get it in your local bookstores. Okay.
Well, I'll make sure to have a link to that in the show notes. And this is going to be episode 155. So you can find those show notes at 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/155. So again, Mark, thank you so much for coming on the show. I've really appreciated this conversation.
Oh, my pleasure, Alan. Thank you so much.
If you enjoyed today's episode, would you share it with friends and family? Thank you. Next time on the 40 Plus Fitness podcast, we're going to mix it up with a pause. We'll go over how using pauses in your lifts can make you much, much stronger. Until then, have a happy and healthy day.